So Ken kind of talked about this trial a little bit earlier at the strip till corn. We are intercropping forages for, I guess, grazing. But we have a couple different crops put in between 60 row spaced corn instead of the regular 30-inch. But yeah, Gurbir can give you a little bit more information than I can on this one.
All right, thank you everybody. It's been a nice long day. Hopefully you found it informative. Uh, I'm now going to talk a little bit about intercropping in corn. So we are doing this project in collaboration with Dr. Yvonne Lawley and Dr. Emma McGo from University of Manitoba. It's a prairie-wide study on intercropping forage crops in corn, and we're doing it at 6 different locations in Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. In Alberta, Lethbridge is one of the locations. Another location is at Olds by Olds College. There's another one at Manning by North Peace Applied Research Association. Um, Saskatchewan, there's a location at Redverse. And in Manitoba, there is a location at Roblin and at Melita. So let's start with intercropping. Uh, does anybody here practice intercropping, or do you have any previous experience? Okay. Uh, so yeah, not many people are doing intercropping. Uh, that's more common now here in our cropping systems. So basically, intercropping is growing 2 or more crops together on the same piece of land at the same time. It helps to include more biodiversity in our cropping systems, and it can make our systems more resilient. There are other advantages, like it can help to reduce soil erosion, it can reduce fertilizer inputs, and it can also help with more efficient utilization of some of the resources depending on what our goals are. In some of the developing countries, intercropping is actually more common, where farming is more of a subsistence type farming. Um, they don't have as much access to chemicals, fertilizers, even specialized equipment. And intercropping acts as a risk management strategy where if one crop fails, there is other crop that can be harvested. Especially with these increasingly variable weather patterns, there is a better chance that if we are growing 2 different types of crops, the peak resource utilization periods for them will be different. So if there is a dry patch, or if there is hail damage, or any kind of adverse weather event, it will affect one crop more than the other crop, and so there will be lesser impact on crop returns, or there won't be a complete crop failure. So um, in the developing countries, we generally moved away from growing multiple crops in the same field around 1940s, with more accessibility to fertilizers, pesticides, and specialized equipment. It became more economically efficient to grow a single crop instead of multiple crops. But in some ways, we have come the full circle. We are going back to some of those systems, uh, trying to incorporate some of those systems. But now we do have the advantage of modern technology, modern equipment, and scientific know-how to eliminate some of the problems that are associated with the systems, and to get the maximum benefits out of these systems. With higher fertilizer costs and more focus on soil degradation, I think it's something that can help us with those problems. Although we do lose the simplicity of a monocropping system, and we do need to put a little bit of more thought and planning into these systems to get them to work properly. So for this study, we are intercropping legume and grass forages with corn. We are intercropping Italian ryegrass, crimson clover, hairy vetch, forage reddish crops. For intercropping, it is critical to have the crop combinations that work well with each other, so that they are not competing in the same manner or at the same time for the same resources. And in some cases, they may be complementing each other or helping each other. Like, for example, for the nitrogen fixing species, crimson clover and hairy vetch can probably fix some nitrogen that can be used by the main crop. The reddish crops, they have a deep penetrating taproot system that can help with soil compaction, but at the same time, different kinds of roots, taproots and fibrous roots, means the system overall is utilizing the soil resources more efficiently. They also cover the soil surface, the forage crops, which means that less sunlight is hitting the ground, and there is less heating up of the ground, which means less evapotranspiration. So that can improve the water use efficiency of the system. They can also help with soil erosion, especially down here, the wind erosion, by covering the surface. So these kinds of benefits can sometimes mean that the overall production potential of a given area can be increased by using something like intercropping. And there is also some evidence that growing multiple species means there is higher biodiversity, so more habitat for the beneficial insects, so that can reduce pest pressure and disease incidence. This is the first year of this study, so we don't have numbers on these things, but we'll hopefully be collecting some of these data and looking at the yield and the disease pressure, etc. Weeds can be an issue in some of these systems. In general, theoretically, lesser number of weeds should be coming up because there is more competition by the intercropped forage crops. But the herbicide choice is limited in these systems, so that can limit the options that we have to get rid of some of these weeds. We had some problems with volunteer mustard and wild oats compared to the control plot where we could spray glyphosate. Some of these intercrop plots do have some weeds. In the intercrop plots too, we did spray the corn crops by using a single boom, but there were still weeds in between the rows in the intercrops. So that can be one of the things to keep in mind. But overall, intercropping is it's easier to adapt for forage-based systems because there is at least not the added complication of harvesting two types of grains. With the forage systems, actually, these could be used to improve the overall forage quality, which is one of the focuses of this study too. Corn has been used for grazing during late winters to extend the growing season and to graze overwintering beef cows. So they generally have higher, corn generally has higher yield and higher energy compared to the perennial forage grasses within this time. So it can reduce winter feeding costs and the labor costs that are associated with feeding cattle in confinement. And in general, their nutritive composition for corn forage is suitable for most classes of cattle. But some of the animals that need higher proteins, the dietary crude protein content of corn can be lower. So the idea here is to intercrop some of these perennial legumes and grasses to see if we can improve the protein content and use corn for higher energy and higher yield. So especially under those cold conditions in the late winter period, um, the animals do have high requirement for both energy as well as proteins, just to keep their metabolic state and to not reduce their weights. And some of the and higher energy source as corn is also useful because ruminants and their rumen microbes, they need some kind of high energy source to be able to assimilate those proteins. So in this study, we are looking at agronomic management practices that can help to adopt this system here at Canadian Prairies. They've done some studies in the U.S. in Wisconsin. They did a study where they found that intercropping corn with red clover and Italian ryegrass, it provided about the same amount of dry matter, but the crude protein content was up by about 25 to 50%. So we want to see if we can replicate that here, and we also want to see what kind of management like row spacing, species selection, fertilization, etc. Do we need to adopt for maximum quality and maximum quantity of forage. So corn can be quite competitive, and I think in the morning session we were talking about the survival of intercrops, and so which is why we have them at 16 spacing in the intercrop plots, just so that the light can penetrate through that corn canopy and reach those intercrops. In the control treatment, which is behind me, they are spaced at 30 inches. And the seeding rate in the control treatment is 36,000 seeds per acre. In the intercrop treatments, it's 18,000 seeds an acre. And so we have that solar corridor in the intercrop treatments to get more resources to those intercrops. Within those 60-inch spacings, we have 5 intercrop rows at about 9 to 10-inch spacing, and Italian ryegrass was seeded at 7 pounds an acre, hairy vetch at about 10 pounds an acre, reddish and crimson clover at about 3 pounds an acre. For corn, we used the DK C31 variety. It's with CHUs 2425, and experimental design was RCBD, 4 plots, standard experimental design. And we're going to measure plant establishment for both the crops and biomass for both crops in mid-September and in mid-November, and feed quality in terms of total digestible nutrients, dietary crude protein, fiber content, starch content, and nitrates. And the study is a part of a bigger program in which they will use the results from this study to look at the economic analysis of whether the pure corn stands or intercrop corn stands are better compared to feeding cattle in confinement. They'll take into account all of the different risk factors like the length of the grazing season, weather conditions, etc. And they will also be doing a large pasture grazing study in which they will look at animal behavior and feed intake, etc. Both of those studies will also be conducted by University of Manitoba. So is there any question at this point, or you can come and look at the plots?
So in the end, at harvest time, how tall will the intercrop stem be? Is it going to be waist high, or what are we looking at?
So we tried some of these same species in the cover cropping study, and we had some problem with the establishment. In this case, we do have them established. So hopefully they will be taking off soon. I don't know how high they will be, but hopefully we will have a decent amount of biomass.
You'll be swathing this then?
Yes. Yeah, will be swathing and then
Chopping the swath.
yeah.
Okay. So the corn was seeded. When was the cover crop seeded? Shortly thereafter, or at the same time, or after a herbicide?
Pretty much the same time. We seeded them around June 3rd for both of the crops. There was a concern with if we go later, we could hurt some of the corn rows. So there are some studies that suggest going a little bit later around the V4 stage, but we seeded it at about the same time. Is there any other question?
So are you bringing a herd of cows in here afterwards?
They are doing that for another study. I think that will be starting probably next year. I'll have to look that up. But they're going to use some of the results from the study to do another study in which they will be bringing in animals and looking at their behavior. But that won't be here in Lethbridge. That will be in Manitoba and under their supervision.
I think if you're good, we can take some time to look through the rows of corn, and then we can head back to the Quonset for some afternoon activity.